everyone. My name is Delia Hagan. I'm the Senior Director of Program Operations at Mentor National, and I am thrilled to welcome you to our monthly CMWS webinar today. We've got a great webinar in store for you. We're just going to give everybody a couple of minutes to join us and get situated, so we will kick things off in a minute or two. See you shortly. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our CMWS webinar today. My name is Delia Hagan. I'm the Senior Director of Program Operations at Mentor National. I'm just here to welcome you. We're going to get started in about a minute, so giving everyone just another moment or two to get situated before we jump right in. And yes, please feel free to introduce yourself to us in the chat so we know who you are. All right, everyone. So welcome. My name is Delia Hagan. I'm the Senior Director of Program Operations at Mentor National. I'm here to welcome you to our CMWS webinar for this month called Incorporating a Strengths-Based Mindset into Mentor Training and Program Policies. We have a fantastic webinar, fantastic panelists for you today. So I'm not going to dilly-dally. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our facilitator for today, Mobile Burrell from Silver Linings Mentoring. Mobile is going to be facilitating today and walking us through all of our content and introducing our panelists. So welcome, Mobile.
Peace, y'all. Thank you for joining us today. And as Delia said, my name is Mobile Burrell, and I'm an Assistant Director of Technical Assistance and Institute Initiatives, is a mouthful, at Silver Lining Mentoring Institute based in Boston, Massachusetts. Before we get started, I want to share some housekeeping information. All attendees have been muted for the best sound. However, we want this to be a participatory experience. So please use the Q&A button in the control panel at the bottom of the screen to ask any questions to our panelists throughout the webinar. There are also live captions available by clicking on the CC Live Transcript button at the bottom of your screen next to the Q&A. Myself, with the support of Delia, Khadija, Alex, and Christina, will be queuing up questions to share with panelists during the Q&A portion of the webinar. Though we may not get to all questions because there are several hundred of you on this webinar, we will do our best. The questions that we generally get to are ones that broaden or deepen the conversation. If we are unable to get to your question today, please feel free to reach out to Mentor or our staff team, whose information will be included in the wrap-up slides, who can connect with panelists as well. First, to get a sense of who all's in the room, you are already dropping in the chat who you are. I've added a question into chat about how you are as you enter this virtual space. If folks can share using an emoji of your choice, how you are entering this space as Khadija launches our first poll to see what your experience level is in the mentoring field. So I'll check out the chat and that poll as we get launched. See some smileys, some celebrations, some big smiles. Okay, boss. Awesome. Okay, big wink, Anthony, I see you. Thumbs up, Melinda. All right. Alicia's kind of like, ah. Silly Kristen, all right, cool beans. And if we can go ahead and check out what your experience level is in the mentoring field. I see this nerdiness, Rachel, I dig it. We'll take a few more seconds to fill out that poll. Cool beans from Orlando, Florida, Fatima. Awesome. Rachel, I don't know what that face means, but giving you good vibes. And we'll ask Khadija to show those poll results. All right, so we can see that most of us are in the experienced area with a few of us as experts and then the rest of us identified as beginners. Cool bean, it's great to know where we are. And if we can launch that second poll, we have one more poll for you, and we'll see what your role is in the mentoring field. You see folks still putting in the chat. Paul, welcome. Crystal, welcome. Anne, welcome. Great to see these emojis coming in as well. Josh, welcome. Awesome. So if we can go ahead and show those results from the second poll and see who are all in the space. So the majority of people in this room are mentoring program staff or practitioners. Awesome. So we are all among us. Enjoy that reference. So thank you for giving us information on who we have in this space. We're a little bit from everywhere, whether we're technical assistance providers, researchers, educators, mentors, but the majority of us are practitioners. So as we continue to get ready, please note that this webinar is being recorded, and in about 1 week, all attendees will receive an email with information about how to download a copy of these slides, as well as view the webinar recording. You can also access this information directly by going to Mentor's website in the next week. We'll also have a resource that we introduce later on, a tool that will be available there as well. To continually improve this series, we're looking for your input. A short survey will pop up as you exit the webinar. Please take 3 minutes to give us your feedback, and we will greatly appreciate it. So now that we're done with housekeeping, we know that practicing a strengths-based mindset and youth mentoring is critical to building on the potential inherent in all youth and families. And I know you fine folks know that as all these practitioners in the room. We believe that good intentions alone will not ensure that a mentoring organization does incorporate those strengths-based mindsets throughout their programming. So our goal with this webinar is to help mentoring practitioners establish and maintain a strengths-based approach throughout program design and implementation. You will be able to hear directly from mentors practicing this approach, as well as professionals who are supporting those mentors, with the goal of you leaving with a better understanding of how this approach supports youth development, an understanding of how to practice it, and a tangible tool to utilize in your own programs. We can move forward to the next slide. There are 4 SLM staff joining today's conversation: myself, my colleague Liz, my colleague Alex, and my colleague Christina, all of whom you will hear from. We also have 4 panelists to share their expertise and experience on training, as well as using a strengths-based approach. I'll introduce those panelists in more detail, starting with Valentina. And Valentina, sorry, just a moment. Awesome. Valentina is a licensed clinical social worker with over 10 years of experience in the social work field. She's been a program coordinator with Silver Lining Mentoring since 2018, where she supports mentors and mentees to build a strong connection and long-lasting relationship, as well as providing training for mentors to be. Valentina also has experience working directly with young people in foster care residing at a group home in Chile, where she is originally from. Her passion is to work towards society where humans' inherent worth is valued and everyone's right to live in peace and safety is honored. And our next panelist is AJ, who has been matched as a mentor with Silver Lining Mentoring since November of 2020. He works for United Way of Massachusetts Bay as a director of data analytics. He and his mentee both love cheering on the Celtics and Red Sox, going to the arcade and theater. Sorry about that loss recently, AJ. Ileana Joaquin is a volunteer mentor to 2 young ladies and serves as an executive board member for Silver Lining Mentoring. She enjoys working closely with SLM to be a consistent source of support to her mentees. She works in marketing professionally as a digital marketing manager in Salem, Massachusetts. In her free time, she likes to stay active with her friends and family, meet with her mentees, and try new restaurants. Looking forward to recommendations, Ileana. And lastly, but not least, we have Lulu Young, who is a lifelong learner who has applied her technology and problem-solving skills to multiple domains during her 30+ years in software. Her 5 beloved nieces and nephews give her ongoing opportunities to re-see the familiar through fresh eyes and keep exploring new topics. They also serve as reminders that one ought not to take oneself too seriously. Lulu's SLM mentoring experience builds on her history of engagement with young people, in addition to the genuine delight that interacting with young people brings her. Lulu finds that her involvement also helps her stay curious, informed, and committed to the world we all share. So those are the panelists you will hear from in just a few moments. But before we get into that, we will pass it over to my colleague, Alex, to talk about a strengths-based approach. And we have a poll, I believe, to launch here. If we can launch that third poll on what you already know about a strengths-based approach.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Mopes, for the wonderful introduction. As Mopes mentioned, I'm Alex Parks, and I'm the volunteer manager with Silver Lining Mentoring. And understanding that our participants here have kind of a sliding scale of experience with strengths-based approach, we're just going to have a very brief and very general explanation / definition of what the strengths-based approach is and how we use it in our programming and training at Silver Lining Mentoring. So the SBA provides the positive supports that all young people need. It focuses on healthy development and encourages youth to be active participants in the mentoring process. This is a contrast to the previous schools of thought, which often labeled the youth as at risk or in need of some sort of fixing. Within this, we work on finding strengths in the youth's natural support system, whether it be family, friends, schools, neighborhoods, larger peer groups, community, you name it, and also encourage them to use their existing strengths and skills that may have not been facilitated as much as we would hope, instead of exclusively trying to develop new ones. And I don't know if I can change the next slide, sorry. At SLM, we incorporate it throughout our onboarding and training process for our volunteer mentors. So during our mentor training sessions, we engage in several different role plays. We meet with current mentors to explain times where they've used the strengths-based approach with their mentees, including times where it was a very positive experience, and even times when it was maybe a little bit more difficult. If a candidate continuously expresses sentiment that does not reflect it, or is very deficit-based, we may work to deflect them and kind of educate them on what the SBA is and how they can approach it in real life. In some rare instances, if someone really is very adamantly against the strength-based approach and expresses views that we do not feel would allow them to perhaps educate themselves appropriately, we may even ask them to not be a mentor with our organization because it is so paramount to what we do in our mission as far as our mentoring is concerned. Thank you.
Awesome. And we see from our poll that the majority of folks selected that identifying youth assets, nurturing them, and using them to support youth in developing in additional areas best represents a mentor's role. And that is what we would have selected, though we can't say that the other two are not things that we should be doing potentially, but that when we think about strengths-based approach, that first option is what we are generally speaking to. And now it is time to hear from our wonderful experts in the room. So to get us started, we have about half an hour to spend chatting with these fine folks. And I have a few questions that we've already talked about, but would also love to hear questions that you all have as they come up. So if you do have questions, again, please drop them into the Q&A section, and we can address those either during the panel or during the Q&A session at the end. So the first question I have is actually for any of the mentors who are interested in hopping in to answer. How have you seen people in your own life use a strengths-based approach? And would be happy to pass it on to whoever wants to get us started.
I can get started. So how has this approach, SBA approach, been used in my own life is the question?
Correct.
Good. So I myself, reintroducing myself, Ileana, I am a mentor. I also serve on the board, but for myself, my experience is a little different. As a mentor, I was myself in foster care. And for some time, I didn't have a mentor or someone to guide me in that sense of what a mentor typically provides and support. I saw that along and later on in life as I was going from my teen years to adulthood And I found someone in my life that was guiding me and supporting my thought process and supporting in the sense of the decisions that I made that not always great, hearing me explain why I made those decisions and instilling some confidence in why I made the decisions I made, allowed me to reflect and redirect with those slight nudges that wasn't in other words, being told what to do, but more so being guided in the sense of giving me the confidence that I needed to see the right path, one would say.
Awesome. Thank you, Ileana. Do any other mentors want to speak to that question?
I think, kind of simply for me, so AJ Spagnuolo, and my role is in work. I think I see strength-based approach a lot to myself. So I'm a data analytics person and I've always been like a numbers person and really enjoy working with numbers. But, I think from a communication standpoint and especially like written communications, I definitely struggle there. And I think, my colleagues, know that about me and will focus in on, what I can do well and give me more opportunities to shine. And then when it comes to trying to improve upon and work through some of those communication issues or, shortcomings, it's not, it's never really punitive. It's never really thinking about, hey, you didn't do this. It's more about, hey, I think you could really take some of that work you're doing to a next level, finding opportunities for me to practice it and work on it constructively, and giving me sort of a voice and thinking about how I can better do that and what would work for me in that approach. Yeah, and I think that's something I see sort of day to day in life.
Awesome. Thank you, AJ. To get more specific for mentors as well, was there a time in your match relationship where you and your mentee were able to use an existing resource in their life or take a strengths-based approach to help them build on a skill they were seeking to build on? And we'll start with Lulu for this one, putting you on the spot there.
Sure, I don't mind at all. To kind of lead into this particular question, I'll sort of answer a little of the previous one and lead into it because I have encountered strength-based approaches throughout my life, both at work and my personal life growing up. And one comment I wanted to make is that even if you have experience with it in one facet of your life, sometimes it's not always clear how to translate it into another facet of your life. And in my mentor-mentee relationship, I think it was for me a discovery. And one of the things that we connected on was, just her curiosity about certain things. And we kind of started talking about this before the session started. Food is a very universal thing, and curiosity in terms of exploring different kinds, different preparations. I think that was one avenue that was a very sort of easy on-ramp for us because we both had experience with that, coming at it from different directions. And it really was a medium that we could share on, where neither of us was leading the other exclusively, and we could kind of use that to go back and forth. And for us, that set a good model to, to begin that relationship. I'll have other things to say about that later, but I'll turn over the floor.
Awesome. Do Ileana or AJ want to weigh in on that question?
So yeah, I think, for me, thinking about my, I just want to make sure, Mobile, we're talking about supports that mentees already have in their lives. Yeah.
Correct.
And I think it's might bleed into a future question too, but thinking about, a lot of the mentees we work with come from foster care. And, I think one of the challenges sometimes I face is friends and family who are asking about my mentee. They don't always take a strength-based approach to thinking about all of the awesome support that my mentee still has in their lives and how much, love and support really they do have. And I would say, coming from a background where I used to work in a foster home, I sort of learned there, the owner of the foster mother or who ran the foster home there, she always made me think about and encouraged me. She wouldn't necessarily tell me the backgrounds of all of the children until I, knew them for a few months. so that I could focus on all the strengths they had and not see them as this person who, went through so much, and think about all their aspects of the past. And it really helped me with my mentee to sort of see, great relationships that he has with his brother, grandmother, family, friends at school, and like really focusing on that. So yeah, and I think, like I said, a challenge is sometimes hearing when a friend or someone, close to me in my personal life sort of asks about this, and they kind of dive right into thinking about, oh, like, how did, what is his past? How did he get where he is now? It's almost like a little jarring to think about, because it's not sort of the approach Silver Lining has taken in sort of training us up, and the approach, we take together in our relationship, me and my mentee.
Awesome. Thank you, AJ.
Yeah.
Ileana, anything you want to add? Awesome. All right. So this question is for Valentina. How have you helped a mentor use a mentee's strengths to build on an area of growth for the mentee?
Thanks, Mobs. Hey, everybody. My name is Valentina Alfaro-Eller, and as Mobile said, I'm a program coordinator with Silver Lining Mentoring, which means that I have the pleasure to hear directly from mentees and mentors very often, and just be familiar with the things they're going through. And one of the, I would say, like, fairly common things that come up for mentors when supporting mentees, especially mentees that are starting to navigate independent living, meaning kind of having to manage their finances, paying their own bills, maybe for the first time, not even in a group home, but by themselves, which comes for everyone with like a lot of new responsibilities and lessons to learn. It's when their mentee might be facing some challenges to cover basic needs, whether that is because lack of finances to do so, or resources, or how do you engage with different services and things like that. And before I go kind of into like a more specific example of that, I just want to say that our mentors are human and very caring humans. So a lot of times where they're coming from, it's like not wanting to see their mentee going through hardship, and that I take all feelings and reactions as data. So it's not something that we'll want mentors to just feel ashamed for, or like, oh, they are seeing their mentee as struggling or not capable of. It's like, well, when you are having a reaction or feel or empathy or are concerned about your mentee going through this, what is that telling you? And usually that's telling them that they care and they don't want their mentee to be in any kind of pain. And at the same time, I'm always curious about how are they translating that into action, if they are, and using a strength-based approach. So just want to kind of like make sure that to remove the shame out of like whatever, more quote unquote deficit space reaction or emotion they might be having, because that's very normal, as our brains are literally trained to pick up on mistakes and things that can be better for survival. So it is a good thing that we're trying to figure out what can be better for next time. And at the same time, having a strengths-based approach requires a lot of like intentionality, and it's a muscle that we need to exercise and a skill that we need to develop. So just normalize that for mentors would be the first step. And then again, just approach it with curiosity, usually of like, why are you reacting that way? It's like a broad enough question that usually mentors tend to say like, oh yeah, it's my own anxiety. Actually haven't heard necessarily from my mentee that this might be something they're really struggling with, but like the way I perceive these quote unquote need not being fulfilled for me would be something really terrible. So there is a lot of projecting sometimes that mentors are quick to like realize that that's happening. I would encourage them to check in with their mentee first about like what are the things that they have done in a situation like that. Even if it's not like the exact situation they are experiencing, they have experienced hardship before, they have experienced stress before. So in situations like that, what have they done? They have done plenty already. So let's figure out what are coping mechanisms and strategies they already have in place, what has worked. And for example, one mentor, their mentee wasn't at a place in their life where budgeting was like taking place. So usually like at the end of the month, they were always kind of just under a lot of pressure, had to figure out how to pay all bills. And that for the mentor was really stressful. So the mentor reached out to me and they were like, well, I told them to budget, but then here we are next month, the same thing is happening. And my question was like, oh, where did that budgeting idea came from? And that's something that was helpful for the mentor in their own life, but they didn't necessarily ask the mentee they didn't ask the mentee necessarily in the process of making decisions or like creating tools to hopefully reduce the stress of like a future situation, what was helpful for them. And additionally, this is a mentee that they have been incredibly resourceful in the past to figure out how to solve whatever situation they're facing at the end of the month. And they have that done on their own. So it's like they already have a lot of skills in place. They're very resourceful. Maybe planning in advance or budgeting, it's not something that works so much for them, but maybe they are more okay with a more like on the spot approach. And that's okay too, even if that felt really uncomfortable for the mentor. It really seemed like it was more uncomfortable for the mentor than for the mentee. So that will be just like one example of a match that it was more like the mentor projecting, but again, just coming from a very caring place, but not having to put in practice a strength-based approach.
Awesome. Thank you, Valentina. I see Lulu has a hand raised. Go ahead and pop in. Oh, you're on mute, Lulu. Sorry.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
So thank you, Valentina. That really prompted something because I have been guilty of projection in that particular way that, not that example, but here's my example. My mentee introduced me to her grandmother via a FaceTime call at one point. And, we chatted and I knew that my mentee had a very strong relationship with her grandmother. And so that was kind of this resonating thing with me because I had a close relationship. But what I projected was that my grandmother will give me certain kinds of support that are different from what my mentee's grandmother will give her. And so in subsequent conversations, when my mentee was seeking a particular kind of support, I would suggest, have you asked your grandmother? But it wasn't right. It wasn't the kind of thing that she and her grandmother had that kind of relationship for. And so it's a very easy, and we figured that out quickly. But it is a very easy thing to do where you feel like or you're aware of the strengths and that you're going, but there's all these little differences that can still kind of crop up. And so what AJ said and what Valentina said, I'm very much at the intersection of that where I'm constantly trying to stay aware. And even when you're staying aware, there's still this little sidebar that kind of can throw you off. And so that vigilance is, it never goes away, basically. So that's what I wanted to add.
That's awesome, Lulu. And that actually queued us up great for the next question I had is thinking about what Valentina was sharing and the support that she has offered before. Wondering, was there a time that you found it difficult to use a strengths-based lens in your match relationship or where you found yourself seeking support from your coordinator in this area? And I think we've heard a little bit from Lulu. Any stories to add, AJ or Ileana?
Sure, I can add in here. I've had a couple moments where I've had difficulty in thinking, okay, strength-based first. I shared briefly, I've had my own share of trauma and foster care experience myself, but that's no different than any other person that maybe has not experienced foster care. We all have a different perspective on life and how things should be. So I often find myself reflecting and taking a moment and thinking back and saying, okay, where do we go from here? How do I approach this? And that's where the SBA practice and that lens kind of comes back in. And you think, okay, here is an example of where I ask them for direction or ask the mentee of what they think may be the best for them and what their thought process is. And I tend to go there often before I start implementing what I think is the right direction. So it's always keeping the mentee first. And for tangible, examples, my mentees are older. They are 18-ish and plus. So they're facing very different difficulties or different paths than I've taken at that age and time. So it's always a moment of truly just practicing reflection and sitting back and letting them take the lead, and then you have, the opportunity to kind of help guide them and use their strengths to focus on.
Awesome. Thank you, Ileana. AJ, you have thoughts you want to share on this question?
Yeah, I think, just kind of expanding a little bit upon what I said earlier, like socially or outside of, the sphere, sometimes not getting, I don't know if pressure is the right word, or thoughts to not bring a strength-based approach to this work. And, it like will pique my curiosity to think more about a mentee's background before that mentee may be willing to share about it, or where we may not be at that relationship point yet where, he would want to talk about some of his background but really wants to talk about, different supports in his life that I wouldn't have, so I wouldn't think of having. And that, I think like Lulu said, sort of, and Valentina was saying, is like sort of projecting that on and thinking about, oh, well, I had this support. Where are you getting that support? And just also thinking about, projecting my life onto my mentee's life. He's early in high school and thinking about, oh, like, where do you want to go to college? Are you taking these classes? And, he's not really there. It's not what he's focused on. He really loves theater, and that's his passion, and wants to continue to do that. And, trying to encourage that and not think about, oh, are you taking this AP class or that AP class, and trying to, build that up. And I think, a lot of times it's just sort of checking my projections onto him and to think about it's a whole new life. He's got amazing things he's good at and wants to work on and do. So trying to, bring that to our conversations.
Awesome. I'm glad you gave that example of maybe you're thinking right now, it's like time to think about college, what's up? But really, he's like, I'm trying to focus on theater, boss. Like, come on. So to that point, was there ever a time for mentors when you had to check your own cultural biases or assumptions, or do some checking in with yourself to recognize where you were failing to see a strength as a strength? And any of you fine folks can hop in.
I can add here an example. So as I mentioned, my mentees are at a pivotal point in their lives. And one, for example, has recently looking for work. And it was a time that I was not exactly understanding the choices that she wanted to make. And although it was meeting her goals as for what she needed at the time, perceivably was just not truly understanding. And I was trying to kind of redirect her and saying, maybe you should apply here and this will get you to this point and that point, because I thought I fully understood her goals. So this is another one of those examples where I had to take a seat back and think, okay, what are her goals? Like maybe I need to check in again, because maybe I created these goals. I took pieces and created this is where she wants to go. So this is the best way. And at the end of the day, she got exactly what she needed to do done. It was just her way. And there's nothing wrong with that. And that's what I needed to understand. But there are many, I think this happens often, and it's really just taking the time to really sit back and think, what do they want and how do they perceive that going, and why? It's like, oh, why did you think that would work, or why do you think that is the right plan? And it's either agreeing and confirming that for them, giving them the confidence, or sometimes it's just questioning and asking and really figuring out their thought process, and being able to provide some additional intel that can help make that a solid plan, but it doesn't mean it's a bad plan. So, and I often refer back to my experience, because I have a way I made my path out of foster care and what I did afterwards. But they both have very different paths, very different goals, and very different ways of getting there. And that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with that. It just means I have to learn what that means to them and how they see that coming to be.
Awesome. And Lulu and AJ, anything to add before I pass a question to Valentina?
Sure. My mentee has so many strengths, and and I know that, and yet sometimes even knowing that, it's hard to translate it, sort of convert it to like my internalized version of something, and so kind of this is all connected to that. And so for my mentee, one of her major stressors is housing. And that's something that has cropped up time and time again throughout our relationship. And she's able to just kind of roll with the punches. And when I first met her, she was 16, and we talked, and she said that one of her goals was to go to college. And so, we talked a bunch about that. And, and then it kind of went away for a while, and then, through all of this housing stuff. And later we had a subsequent conversation where, somehow we were talking about picturing herself at age 30 or something. And she, pictured herself having completed college by then. And so she had this like long-term plan in her head. And it was really amazing for me to see that, because it would have been easy to say all this stuff you're doing now, none of it was college oriented at all, but she had, more important things going on at that time. And so I had always appreciated her resilience and her ability to kind of just go with things. But in that moment of conversation, it just like opened my eyes to this whole new door of she's still got that going on. And she's just really great at compartmentalizing and focusing her energies right now where they need to be right now, so that that future goal can come to be. And so that was something where I thought I saw the strength, and then and then I saw the strength, so those things can kind of sneak up on me, I guess.
That's awesome, Lulu. I can attest that Lulu's mentee rolls with the punches, having accidentally given her wrong directions to her first group meeting with us, and her letting me know, no, Mobile, incorrect. I walked for 40 minutes the wrong direction. So she can roll with the punches, and thank you for sharing that story, Lulu. This question is for Valentina. When was a time when you had to give really critical feedback to a mentor who wasn't following a strengths-based approach? And we're curious with that, how did you approach that? And then what was the results of that?
That's a good question. And I have to say that doesn't happen all that often when it comes to mentors thinking about how to approach conversations or support for mentees, but it tends to happen a lot for mentors when they think about their own role and their impact. That I don't know. I just tend to give a lot more feedback about mentors really doing a great job, but for them maybe feeling a little bit more insecure, just really wanting to do better. But when there was this one time when I was actually out of the office and my supervisor was covering that day for me, and a mentor reached out and asked for financial aid, financial support for the mentee, which is something, for folks that don't know, we offer that in emergency cases for mentees that really need food on the table, or funds for transportation or hygiene products or things like that. So the mentor had reached out to request that kind of support, and my supervisor approved. And then next day I came to the office, I checked in with the mentee, and I found out that the mentee had not requested or wanted any of this support that the mentor had requested from SLM. So then I went back to the mentor and was like, tell me a little bit about kind of what was your thought process to request that. And I think that it took for me to take a step back and not make assumptions about where the mentor was coming from. So I had to kind of really practice what I preach to mentors as well, of just, I had to take my own step back, deep breaths, and be like, okay, really gonna try to approach with curiosity and not assume what this mentor wanted. And again, it ended up, it came from a good place of, again, this mentor just seeing the mentee not having enough money to paying their phone bill by the end of the month, their phone was gonna be shut off. and just going ahead and submitting the request without including the mentee. And that was something that I talk about it with the mentor about like I understand your intent is really good, and also let's think about the impact of you not including the mentee and like making decisions for them and quote unquote jumping to fix them or save them when like in reality they do have the strengths and the skills. It's a mentee that had previously reached out to SLM for that kind of support when they need it, when they want it, they knew how to do it. And it's very different when the mentor presents these alternatives and it's like, are there any barriers for you to reach out to SLM? Would you like support with that? How do you feel about like asking for money? Is that something that like doesn't feel comfortable to you? Let's talk about that. But like they went ahead and did it for the mentee, which I also had to share with the mentor that like, unfortunately, even if their intent was to be helpful, that also signals or sends the message to the mentee that maybe you're not capable of doing that, or I don't trust you enough that you can do this. And at the end of the day, it can feel disempowering. And I knew for sure that this mentor wanted the opposite. So I also named that. I was like, I know this is not your intention. And these are like unexpected consequences that like you're not involving the mentee or like considering the strengths or capacity to do this might have as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Valentina, for that great example. And we do have about 4 more minutes for our panel with one final question before I turn it over to my colleague, Christina, to introduce the tool and that we've been talking about. So last question for you all. How has working with your coordinator helped you incorporate a strengths-based approach? What was something of value they added? Or for Valentina, what was something of value that you added? And any of you all can plan to hop in. I see AJ getting ready.
Yeah. So I actually was raising my hand a second ago. So I actually have the pleasure of having Valentina as my coordinator. And, you know, I was planning on talking about this, but she talked about helping a mentor bring strengths-based approach to themselves too, because I think, you know, that's something I definitely have struggled with. So I want to talk about a specific example. So this was early in 2021, you know, right deep in the middle of COVID. And, you know, I was going through a pretty dark time and, you know, mental health wise for myself and engaging in a lot of like unhealthy behaviors and was seeking out some support. And at this time, it sort of interacted with a time in my mentee's life where I was under the impression that, or, you know, we were thinking that adoption was in place and it was happening. And sort of knowing where I was mentally, and thinking everything was okay, I sort of checked out a bit for a few months as a mentor. And, you know, I was hyper focused and thinking a lot about what I could not bring to my mentee in my current state. And, you know, how not being fully there and fully like mentally well enough to be there. I thought, you know, I can't provide support to somebody else. I'm not in a place to do that. And, you know, after talking with Valentina and checking in and reconnecting with Mentee and, you know, Valentina helped me kind of think about like, yes, this is, you know, a tough time. This is also something, an experience that you can share openly with your mentee and thinking about, you know, how can these experiences help your mentee? You know, maybe this is something that they've also gone through. So, and, you know, also think about still all of what I still felt I could give at the time. And yeah, so I think like that was a time where, you know, Valentina helped me kind of think inward and use this approach for myself. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, AJ. We have about 1 more minute if Ileana or Lulu want to chime into that question before I turn it over to my colleague, Christina.
Sure. I think the example that comes to mind to me, because my mentees are older, I've struggled in the past with not wanting to over contact them if they've seemed a little distant and they live very active, different lives. And Valentina is also my coordinator. So I've been lucky enough to contact her and just get that reassurance, I think sometimes from her where it's okay to reach out as you would a family or friend. Because, I constantly was thinking I need to have these boundaries of, I'll reach out and then give them the space and then time it out maybe a week and then reach out again. Whereas she created this space where it's okay to let them know that you're thinking of them and but also translate in there that you're not expecting them to reply or be active in a conversation, just so that they know you're there, which I think was helpful, because I think one of the most important elements of being a mentor for SLM is just being a constant present of support. And that doesn't mean constantly talking, constantly problem solving. It's just being there and having them know also that maybe you're going through something, or that you're either available, not available. So just really creating that line of communication, which for a little bit, I've struggled of just not knowing, what's too much, what's not enough of, hey, I'm here. So that's been nice to receive that support on the other end from Valentina and SLM.
Awesome. Thank you, Liliana. And we will have time at the end for questions and time to hear some more from these great panelists. But at this time, I'll ask us to move forward to the slides for Christina to talk about strengths-based mindset and the elements of effective practices for mentoring.
Thanks. So as you may know, the Elements of Effective Practice for Mentoring, which is published by Mentor National, is a guide for mentoring programs with all of the best practices for running an effective mentoring program. It's the first and best place for programs to begin when launching a program or making improvements. Therefore, it's also a helpful framework to use when thinking about how to infuse a strengths-based approach throughout the program. So Silver Lining Mentoring has used the Elements of Effective Practice as a reference point for the tool that we created to help your program identify ways that you can further utilize a strengths-based approach. The tool will be available for download alongside a recording of this webinar on the CMWS webpage. And in the meantime, I'm going to ask my colleagues to place a link to a Google file with the tool in the chat. So I have it available, so I'm just going to drop that in the chat there. Awesome. So you can take a moment to open that up, but I will also just describe the tool. So the tool is called Growing a Strengths-Based Approach Throughout Your Mentoring Program, a self-assessment tool for program staff. And the purpose of this guide is to help you strategize and brainstorm ways to incorporate a strengths-based practices in each of the elements of effective practice, from recruitment to mentor training and beyond. I'd like to share a few examples of how a strengths-based approach is utilized in different parts of the Silver Lining Mentoring program to illustrate ways that this can show up. So our first example will look at the way our organization talks about young people in our program, in our public communications, and things like mentor info sessions. Silver Lining utilizes person-first language, things like youth impacted by foster care, rather than terms like foster kids. And we avoid deficit-based phrases like a biological parent gave a child up for adoption, but instead use phrases like a parent made an adoption plan. We utilize terms that are inclusive, not exclusionary, like saying simply family or caregiver, rather than using phrases like real family or birth parent. We actively work to break down any public misperceptions or stereotypes by providing context and data in our communication. For example, we note that youth enter state custody through no fault of their own. We note important contextual data, including things like the high rate of moves that youth in foster care experience across different homes during their time in care. The fact that Black and Indigenous youth and LGBTQ+ youth enter foster care at disproportionately high rates for a variety of reasons. And the fact that most youth enter foster care due to a case of neglect, not due to abuse. We celebrate the strengths and accomplishments of our young people and mentors, and we don't solely report statistics or stories that reflect the challenges they face. For example, this year, we celebrated the fact that we have matches that have been in 20-year-long relationships, including our founder, Justin Pasquarello, who himself has lived experience in foster care. Our second example from Silver Lining Mentoring will look at the mentor screening process. So part of Silver Lining's screening process includes an approximately 90-minute one-to-one interview with a member of our program staff, where we learn more about a mentor applicant's interest in mentoring, their life experiences, and expectations for this volunteer role. I'd like to share a few examples of interview questions that allow us to explore a mentor applicant's views on strengths-based approaches. Each of these questions allows our interviewer to explore with the applicant how they have or have not experienced a strengths-based approach in their own life and how they might practice it as a mentor. Questions include, as a mentor, what do you imagine your ideal relationship with a mentee will look like? This allows us to explore mentor expectations and self-awareness. We can then have a discussion about realistic expectations and open-mindedness. Another example question would be, people who have been impacted by the foster care system often maintain relationship with their families of origin. What would it be like to support a mentee as they navigate that? This allows us to touch on a mentor applicant's experience with and views on individuals who are child welfare system involved and ability to honor a youth's autonomy and personal values. We also utilize scenarios in our interview, including we discuss a scenario where a 17-year-old mentee finds out they are pregnant. This allows us to explore a mentor applicant's thought process in a hypothetical but realistic scenario. Lastly, I'll share an example from the monitoring and support element of effective practice that illustrates the way a mentor can be part of a village of support for a young person and add to relationships the youth may already have. So in Silver Lining's program model, our staff are the primary points of contact for the many professionals and adults that are in the life of a youth in foster care. These may include people like social workers, group home staff, clinicians, therapists, and many other providers. However, in our mentor training, we do prepare our mentors that there may be some opportunities for the mentor to interact with these other individuals. Our program staff are available to ensure that mentors are prepared and that any such interactions are youth-focused. Things like during the match support calls, our program staff may have coaching conversations with mentors about ways they can support a youth that involve interactions with other people in the young person's life. Examples of this in our program have included a mentor attending things like a graduation celebration, where members of the mentee's family, friends, and other staff in their life are present. Or a mentor attending a meeting held by the young person's social worker to prepare a young person who is aging out of foster care. Silver Lining believes that the mentor should only be present if it is desirable by the youth, and that our program staff stand ready to help the mentor prepare for what these situations may be like and how they can show up in the most supportive way. We can go to the next slide. Thanks. At this point, I would like to offer an opportunity for us to hear from the knowledge and experience of the practitioners attending today by inviting a few voices and perspectives to offer a few words in the chat about how a strengths-based approach shows up in your organization. As we move forward in the rest of the webinar, I invite you to take a few minutes to type into the chat and let us know, is there an example you'd like to share with the other attendees about how your organization is practicing a strengths-based approach? I've included a few prompts on the slide to help get you started with ways that you may share with us. So I do encourage you to share those out and also welcome any questions on the tool that I can address.
Awesome. Thank you, Christina. And remember, you can drop in questions into the Q&A box, as well as your responses to what your organization does to foster a strengths-based approach into the chat.
And I just want to lift up one of the questions that we had submitted in the Q&A section, which was how organizations can really deepen their strengths-based approach. So when you are already practicing it, and I do hope that this tool will help you sort of brainstorm and analyze across each of the elements, taking them methodically one by one and continuing to brainstorm new things that you can add, start doing, stop doing, or do differently throughout the program. So I do hope that's helpful to you no matter where you are in implementing a strengths-based approach in your program. So thank you for that, and can probably pass it over to Mobes and Liz.
Awesome. Yeah, passing it over to Liz, and we can move to the next slide.
Hi, everyone. I'm Liz, Program Coordinator for the Institute at Silver Lining Mentoring. We definitely want you to stay in touch with us. The Silver Lining Institute partners with service providers across the country to promote best practices in mentoring youth in foster care through a training and technical assistance program. Whether you are just starting out or looking to enhance an existing program, the Institute is a valuable resource. You can find out more about our training and technical assistance program by going to our webpage. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram for valuable resources and upcoming events. Next slide, please. So we've selected these additional resources to share, though we recognize that there are many tools and resources out there. If you know of any, please drop them in the chat. The Youth Development and Resiliency Training developed by Youth Collaboratory includes an overview of the PYD approach and highlights elements to consider in mentoring programs. The PYD resource manual is an entire kit that includes activities, handouts, PowerPoints, and even links to additional resources. The fact sheet from the Department of Education's Mentoring Resource Center focuses on how to incorporate youth development practices into mentor programs and mentor training. In the strength-based workbook from the Alberta Mentoring Partnership, you can learn about specific strength-based organizational practices. And finally, in the strengths-based resource from the Big Brothers Big Sisters organization, you'll find key principles and strategies for incorporating SBA into your program. Next slide, please. And this slide just details where each of the resources can be found online. Thank you.
Awesome. And we see a lot of input coming into the chat, and appreciate you all sharing the resources you're aware of and how your organizations are already utilizing a strengths-based approach, and encourage you to continue putting that information in as Delia starts wrapping us up. And we can move forward to the next slide.
Thanks a lot, Mobile. Actually, if you want to go back one, I'll just quickly review some of our resources at Mentor National that you might find useful. And then after that, we'll go ahead and take some of your questions, which I think we'll have a little time for. So first and foremost, if you don't already know about Mentor affiliates across the nation, they're really great resources for all things training, resources, public awareness, advocacy. So if you don't know about your local affiliate, there's a link right there on the slide, and you'll have access to it after the fact. So you can look up and see if you do have an affiliate in your area that you can connect with. The Mentoring Connector, also a fantastic database that you can use to look up mentoring programs in your area if you want to volunteer, or if you are looking for services for a young person or for yourself. And then finally, the National Mentoring Resource Center, as was mentioned, no cost training and technical assistance. So you can get support for a mentoring program on all the things you heard about today, and learning to, strengthen your training, your match support, any aspect of your mentoring program that you want to strengthen or do some quality improvement. We've got mentoring experts all across the nation, and this service is brought to you by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, which provides this center at no cost to the mentoring field. So just some great resources. If you want to go to the next slide. A reminder that there's going to be a survey after this webinar that'll just pop right up, so you can go ahead and answer the questions. And it's really helpful feedback for our series. We look at all the feedback with our planning team to inform our future webinars. We also will send you an email with information about the slides, the recording, the resources that were shared today, and those will also be on the link you see on the bottom of your screen, our CMWS page. So we invite you to stay connected with us at the CMWS. This series is one of our oldest services at Mentor National. It's something we've been doing for years and years, and it's just evolved over the years to really be responsive to the needs of the field. So we want your feedback to keep it a really strong and supportive resource for the field. So I think we'll stop there and move to questions on the next slide. If you haven't used the Q&A tab yet, you're welcome to also use the chat. Folks have really been active in there during the webinar, which we love to see. But if you do have a question that you'd like answered, try pulling up the Q&A tab on the bottom bar there and just type in your question. And we'll see how many we can get to in our remaining time. Mobile, did you see any that rose to the top for you, or you want me to take a look real quick?
I'm only seeing one question in there that I think Christina might be responding to, unless my computer is telling me an untruth. So I have a comment from Sue as I'm listening and thinking that the strengths-based approach should be reviewed yearly for mentors. Listening and wincing at the things that I fall into that are not strengths-based and need reminders and reviews like this. So I appreciate, Sue, that feedback and just a reminder for us all to revisit this language and approach so that we aren't letting it fall off of our radars for implementation. We have a question from Sylvia. Any specific references for using strengths-based approach in younger kids, girls age 11 to 13 years old, or middle school age? I'll see if any of our panelists have input or staff have input on this one. And if not, we can make a note of that and circle back with any resources we may have. So any panelists or staff have a response for Sylvia at this time?
I don't have particular resource, but something that I usually recommend with folks, especially with younger folks that might developmentally not be in a place to understand more abstract terms like strengths or things like that. It's just like to give very specific feedback when they see a trait, like identify it and name it, like very specifically, instead of saying like, oh, you did such a great job. Like, what about that all of those things you saw did like the great job? Can you name them individually, especially for younger folks that might not understand what a job even is, like what that entails, and like the process. I think that's one of the things I just try to recommend to mentors that have younger youth.
Awesome, thank you, Valentina. Anyone else have anything to add to that response from Valentina before we pop into the next question? So we have a question here of, does anyone know of any particular resources around supporting cross-cultural matches? And so again, I'll ask any of the panelists or SLM staff what they might recommend for supporting cross-cultural matches.
I don't have any specific resources in mind, although there is certainly the mentoring guide for mentoring that are available. But I would say that the same principles apply cross-culturally. And certainly it's on the mentor to educate themselves about aspects of their mentee's culture or areas of difference. So I think leaning into that role of being curious and gathering information, because sometimes it can be easy to place valences of value when there's areas of culture or a difference that we don't understand. So helping to get a little closer to understanding a mentee's identity and background and where they're coming from, I think will make it much easier to be able to identify those strengths across differences.
I was going to say something very similar to what Christina just shared, and also to add, I don't have them right now on the top of my head, but like there are a few articles that are really good about how to talk about racism with mentees, or how to talk about the news, particularly when there are like episodes of like racism that are very massive or public. And I've noticed that for some mentors that their race or their racial identity might not necessarily be like impacted, or like I noticed for some of the mentors that identify as white on my caseload, they struggle feeling confident on like bringing this up, or how to talk about race with their mentee when they feel like they don't have like the same, like a shared like identity. And even if you have like a shared identity, doesn't have you have the same experience, right? So let's start with that. And then it's very similar to what Christina was saying. It's usually, how can you just like start with like, how does your mentee feel, regardless of like if you share like the same identity or culture? What do you understand? What is their understanding of what's going on? How are they perceiving the situation? Because everyone might perceive it in a different way. So again, that curiosity piece, but definitely for some folks, tools like how to start conversations about race have been helpful, especially when it's like a cross-cultural relationship.
Awesome, thank you, Valentina. There's a couple of other questions coming in. I see my colleague is responding to one of them, so I'll hold off on that one. And a second question that's coming in is, how does your org implement a strength-based approach for mentors? How do you remind them of their innate strengths and assets? And I will pass that question to Valentina and any other staff or mentors who want to chime in.
Great, I love this question. So we talk about strength-based approach during our mentor training, which is part of our screening process, because we want everyone to have the same language, like the same understanding. So when I mention like strength-based in my ongoing support, we all kind of know what we're referring to. So kind of the first poll question that you saw about like what, like all of those things could be strength-based, but like what does SLM understand? What is the SLM strength-based approach, right? So what is our understanding about it? So we share that with mentors. We have like a more like lecture-based, kind of similar to like the slides that you saw here during our training. And we also have like hands-on activities for mentors to practice putting on the strength-based lens during training, because as I said earlier, it's definitely a skill that continues to develop and requires a lot of intentionality. So even if we know it in theory, it's important to continue to name it and bring it up to light. And this is something both Ileana and AJ were sharing before too. Part of my role as a coordinator, it's to like highlight when I see those strengths happening, especially because they are so sometimes just very focused on doing things the best they can. Sometimes that approach can like lead to like what we need to improve, which again, it's a great thing, and also sometimes kind of leaves behind what we're already doing well, or like what's happening that can be a strength already. Mostly for themselves, I would say, if I'm speaking about macho support, it's something that I see more often happening for mentors about when they think about themselves. I just have to remind them more often about their own strengths and the strengths they're already bringing to the relationship, or how the relationship is like in a good stage. And like a really good example that a lot of folks' relationship during COVID became maybe less visible, the communication or the connection, because in person wasn't happening, and like virtual fatigue, it's real for all of us. So maybe the communication decreased, and yet these folks are still matched and are still maintaining a relationship despite of the past 2 years and everything happening in their lives. And like nowadays it requires extra effort and intentionality to engage in relationships, especially if that's virtually. It's not something that like it's always pleasant or without effort. And the fact that both mentees and mentors continue to do so, for me, it speaks highly of the strength of their relationship and the intentionality and commitment on both parts. So that's just something that, because I'm kind of like taking a little bit backseat, I can kind of look at the big picture of what's happening in the relationship and just really bring those things and into the conversation and naming them. I would say naming literally like the word strength or like what I identify, what I perceive as a strength.
Awesome, thank you, Valentina. And I dropped in the chat a question that was asked and answered. How do you say that? Typing, not verbally, non-verbally. And wondering if there are any other questions from you fine folks in the audience, or any other insights that our panelists want to offer that we may not have touched on yet at this point. All right, it sounds like we may have answered all of the questions. I see something coming into the chat though, just a moment. You're quite welcome. And materials will be indeed shared. PowerPoint will be available on the CMWS website along with the other resource that we mentioned, the strengths-based assessment, approach tool that Christina walked us through. So you will be able to access those and a recording of this webinar afterwards as well. All right. So I think with that, I'll pass it to my colleague, Delia.
Great, thank you so much, Mobile. So I just want to thank all of the panelists and Mobile for facilitating today. I personally learned a lot from this webinar and really loved hearing all the actionable examples, things I can apply right away. So really appreciate everybody's insight and candor about your own experiences with this topic. So with that, we'd just like to remind you about next month's webinar. And this one's a really interesting topic as our year continues to just never be boring and things just don't seem to kind of slow down with current events and the challenges that our young people and our mentors and ourselves as practitioners are facing. We want to talk about mentoring in this quote unquote new normal that folks keep referring to. What does it mean to continue to engage participants in mentoring in these still COVID-y times? So we would love for you to join us on July 28th from 1 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern for our next webinar. And I just want to thank everyone for their participation and their engagement in the chat and for being here today. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.